Hey, welcome back. Get cozy, let everything quiet down, and we'll ease into a slow tale from Norse mythology. Loki enters Norse mythology without a birthplace, without a throne, and without the comforting clarity that defines most of the gods around him. He is not born into Asgard in splendor, nor raised among the giants in open hostility toward the gods. Instead, Loki begins his existence in the margins of the cosmos, shaped by contradiction from the very start. His father is Farbauti, whose name is often translated as dangerous striker or cruel smiter. In Skaldic language, this is not a gentle figure. Farbauti is a giant, associated with sudden violence and raw elemental force. His presence in the myths is faint but meaningful, suggesting destruction that arrives without warning. Lightning, wildfire, or shattering impact. Loki's mother is Laufey, also called Nell. Unlike Farbauti, Laufey's name carries softer implications. Some interpretations associate her with leaves, foliage, or needles. Where Farbauti represents violent impact, Laufey suggests subtlety, surface, and fragility. Loki emerges from the union of these two forces, sudden destruction and quiet precision. This parentage matters deeply in Norse cosmology. The world of the gods is not divided cleanly between good and evil, but it is divided socially. The Aesir are order maintainers. Giants represent chaos, not always malicious, but always threatening to stability. Loki, born of giants yet living among gods, belongs fully to neither side. Unlike Thor, whose giant ancestry is balanced by his unquestioned role as protector of Asgard, Loki's lineage places him under constant suspicion. He is clever where Thor is strong, verbal where others are physical, adaptive where others are fixed. These traits make him useful, but also untrustworthy. Early Norse poetry does not introduce Loki as a villain. In fact, some of the earliest references depict him as Odin's companion. The two are bound by an oath of brotherhood, an unbreakable social contract in Norse culture. This is not a casual friendship. Blood brotherhood meant shared fate, shared honor, and shared responsibility. Odin does not take this oath lightly. He is a god obsessed with knowledge, prophecy, and survival. That he binds himself to Loki suggests recognition of Loki's value. Loki is intelligent, observant, and able to navigate situations that brute strength cannot resolve. Yet, even in these early depictions, discomfort follows Loki like a shadow. He laughs too easily, he speaks too sharply. He understands social weaknesses and is unafraid to expose them. In a culture where honor and reputation are currency, this makes him dangerous. The Norse cosmos itself reflects Loki's nature. Creation begins not with harmony, but with collision. Fire meeting ice, chaos forming structure. Loki embodies that collision. He is not an intruder in the mythological world. He is a product of its fundamental rules. Trickster figures appear across many cultures, but Loki is distinct in his proximity to power. He does not lurk on the edges of myth. He sits at the tables of gods. He travels with Thor. He speaks directly to Odin. His mischief does not merely embarrass, it alters the trajectory of the cosmos. In early stories, Loki's intelligence is framed as a gift. He solves problems the gods create for themselves. He negotiates with giants, deceives enemies, and retrieves impossible objects. His methods are questionable, but his results are undeniable. Still, his presence is tolerated rather than celebrated. Loki is never given a realm to rule. He holds no formal office. He is included, but never anchored. This lack of belonging becomes a defining wound. Loki's outsider status is reinforced linguistically. In poetry, he is often described with kennings that emphasize deceit, fire, or instability. He is a shapeshifter not only in body, but in identity. He adapts because adaptation is survival. Shapeshifting is not merely a magical ability, it is symbolic. Loki becomes what a situation demands, sacrificing consistency for effectiveness. This flexibility unsettles gods who define themselves through fixed roles. The Aesir value order, even when they fail to uphold it. Loki questions order instinctively. He exposes hypocrisy not out of moral conviction, but out of curiosity and amusement. This makes him socially corrosive. Yet without him, the gods would lose many of their greatest advantages. Loki's mind is a weapon they repeatedly rely on, even as they fear it. This tension defines Loki's earliest role: indispensable, distrusted, and uncontained. He is not born evil, he is born different. And in a world where difference is tolerated only when useful, Loki's fate is quietly sealed from the beginning. As the myths unfold, this foundational imbalance, giant-born yet god-adjacent, clever yet ungoverned, will widen. What begins as mischief will become resentment. What begins as laughter will sharpen into accusation. But at the start, Loki stands beside the gods not as an enemy, but as a necessary disruption, a living reminder that order in the Norse world is never permanent, never safe, and never complete. When Loki enters Asgard, he does not arrive as a conqueror, a petitioner, or a hostage. He arrives as something far more unsettling, a peer without a title. The halls of the Aesir are structured around rank, lineage, and function. Odin rules. Thor protects. Heimdall watches. Tyr upholds law. Each god embodies a role that stabilizes the cosmic order. Loki does not. His place among the Aesir is informal, undefined, and therefore volatile. He is present at feasts, councils, and journeys, yet he holds no sworn duty beyond his oath to Odin. This lack of obligation grants him freedom and breeds resentment among gods whose identities are bound tightly to responsibility. Early myths show Loki moving easily through Asgard's social spaces. He speaks without permission. He jokes without deference. He mocks without immediate consequence. This alone marks him as different. Norse society prized sharp speech, but only within understood limits. Loki delights in testing where those limits break. Odin tolerates this behavior not because he is blind to the risk, but because Loki provides something rare: perspective. Loki sees weaknesses others ignore. He understands giants as more than enemies. He understands rules as tools rather than truths. For a god obsessed with foresight, this makes Loki invaluable. On Odin's travels through the worlds, Loki often accompanies him. These journeys are dangerous, requiring quick thinking, disguise, and negotiation. Loki excels here. He lies convincingly. He adapts instantly. He reads intent faster than force can counter it. Yet even as Loki proves useful, the seeds of distrust deepen. Among the Aesir, Thor is Loki's most frequent companion. The contrast between them could not be sharper. Thor is direct, physical, predictable. Loki is verbal, mental, unpredictable. Together, they form an effective pair, strength guided by strategy, chaos tempered by power. But this partnership is asymmetrical. Thor trusts Loki more than Loki deserves. Thor assumes loyalty, where Loki practices convenience. This imbalance repeatedly places Asgard at risk. Loki's early mischief is rarely malicious. He steals, insults, provokes, and embarrasses. The consequences are usually social rather than existential. Hair is cut. Pride is wounded. Situations escalate. The gods tolerate this because Loki fixes what he breaks. This pattern becomes central to his role: instigator followed by rescuer. Loki creates crises that force the gods into dependence on his intelligence. Each time he succeeds, his position is reaffirmed. Each time, resentment grows. The Aesir are not ignorant of this manipulation. They see the pattern. But Norse myth is not a morality tale. It is a study in inevitability. The gods accept short-term solutions, even when they guarantee long-term disaster. Loki's humor plays a critical role in his acceptance. Laughter in Norse culture is not merely entertainment, it is social currency. Loki's jokes disarm tension, even when they cut deep. He says what others will not, exposing insecurity beneath divine authority. This makes him simultaneously refreshing and intolerable. Feasts are where this tension surfaces most clearly. Loki drinks alongside the gods, speaks freely, and observes closely. He remembers insults. He catalogues weaknesses. What begins as banter often ends as quiet hostility. Yet Loki is still welcomed. Why? Because when giants threaten Asgard, when bargains turn sour, when impossible tasks arise, Loki delivers results. He negotiates contracts. He exploits loopholes. He solves problems no one else can solve cleanly. This usefulness grants him immunity, but not trust. The gods begin to treat Loki less like a companion and more like a volatile tool. They threaten him when he fails. They coerce him into fixing disasters. Fear replaces friendship, obligation replaces loyalty. This shift is subtle but decisive. Loki senses it, his tone sharpens, his jokes grow crueler, his solutions grow riskier. He remains among the Aesir but no longer feels of them. This social limbo, inside yet excluded, fuels Loki's growing antagonism. He is blamed when things go wrong but rarely thanked when they go right. His intelligence is exploited without being respected. In Norse culture, honor is everything. Loki's honor is constantly questioned, yet constantly relied upon. This contradiction corrodes him. By the end of this period, Loki's role is clear. He is not a god of order or chaos, but of disruption. He accelerates events. He forces change. He exposes flaws the gods would rather ignore. Asgard survives because of Loki, but it also weakens because of him. This duality defines his time among the Aesir: companion, problem solver, liability. And the balance is already slipping. There is a certain kind of trouble that feels small when it begins. It starts with a quiet moment, a private impulse, a decision made for amusement rather than necessity. And then, without warning, it pulls an entire world into motion. That is the shape of Loki's mischief in one of the most famous stories tied to him, the story of Sif's hair, and of the treasures that would eventually become some of the gods' greatest defenses. Sif, the wife of Thor, is described in the myths as having hair of remarkable beauty, golden and shining. In the world of Norse poetry, that detail is not just decoration. Hair, especially a woman's hair, can symbolize vitality, honor, and status. And Sif is not an ordinary figure in the god's circle. She is close to Thor, and Thor is not merely strong. He is the god the giants fear most. So when Loki, in an especially mischievous mood, slips close to Sif while she sleeps and cuts off her hair, it is not simply a prank. It is a deliberate test of the one person in Asgard who is least suited to tolerate tests. When Thor discovers what has happened, the reaction is immediate and physical. Loki is seized. Thor threatens him in plain terms, the kind of threats that are not theatrical in the myths. Thor is not a god who threatens as an opening move. He threatens as a precursor to action. And Loki, for all his wit, knows what Thor's hands can do. He does what he often does when he pushes too far. He promises a fix. Not an apology, not a moral lesson, an outcome. Loki offers Thor something that will satisfy the injury done to Sif and will restore Thor's honor. He claims he can obtain new hair crafted by the finest smiths in the worlds below. Thor agrees to give him the chance. And Loki leaves Asgard, traveling to the realm where the dwarves work. In Norse tradition, dwarves are not simply craftsmen. They are makers of wonders, capable of forging objects that blur the line between art and magic. Their work is more than metal. It is fate made tangible. In the account preserved in the Prose Edda, Loki seeks out a group of dwarves known as the Sons of Ivaldi. He commissions from them a replacement for Sif's hair, gold that will not sit on the scalp like a helmet or a wig, but will grow as natural hair grows, becoming part of her. The dwarves agree. And then, in a pattern that defines Loki's life, Loki does not stop at repairing what he damaged. He uses the crisis to create leverage. He asks for more. The Sons of Ivaldi forge not only Sif's golden hair, but also two other gifts, Odin's spear Gungnir and the ship Skidbladnir, associated with Freyr. Gungnir is no ordinary spear in later tradition. It is described as a weapon that does not miss its mark, an extension of Odin's authority and violence, sharpened into certainty. Skidbladnir is no ordinary ship. It is described as the best of ships, built with such craft that it can carry many and still be manageable. In some accounts, it can be folded and carried like an object far smaller than its true size. Already, Loki has transformed his mistake into a delivery of advantages. If the story ended there, Loki might look almost noble, a troublemaker who corrects himself by bringing gifts. But Loki is Loki. He cannot leave a success untested. Once these treasures are made, Loki turns his attention to competition. He goes to another pair of dwarves, Brokkr and his brother Atri, who is also called Sindri in some traditions. Loki boasts, he taunts, and then he makes a wager. The wager is not money, or gold, or a favor. It is his own head. Loki wagers that Brokkr and Atri cannot make 3 treasures as fine as the ones he has already obtained. This is a strange moment, and it reveals something important about Loki. He is capable of fearing Thor enough to scramble for his life, yet he is also capable of gambling his life in a contest driven by pride. That is the trickster's contradiction. He can be cautious and reckless in the same breath. Brokkr accepts the wager, and the dwarves go to work. In the Prose Edda's account, Atri gives Brokkr a task that sounds simple. Operate the bellows, keep the fire hot, keep it steady. Do not stop, not even briefly, until the forging is done. A smith's work depends on rhythm, heat, airflow, timing. If the bellows falter at the wrong moment, metal cools, impurities settle, shapes distort. Brokkr agrees. Atri places a pig's hide into the forge. The heat rises. The work begins. And then, as Brokkr pumps the bellows, a fly lands on him and stings. The myth makes a point of the fly. This is not random inconvenience. The fly is Loki in disguise. He is trying to sabotage the dwarves' work so he can win his wager. The first stings are painful, but Brokkr continues. He refuses to stop. From that first forging, the dwarves produce Gullinbursti, the golden-bristled boar associated with Freyr. In later descriptions, Gullinbursti's bristles shine, and the boar can run through air and over sea, swift and unwavering. Atri is not finished. He places gold into the forge. Brokkr continues working the bellows. Again, the fly returns, stinging more aggressively. Brokkr endures. From that forging comes Draupnir, Odin's ring. It is described as a ring from which more rings drip or drop at regular intervals, 8 rings of equal weight, a strange and powerful image of self-renewing wealth. Then comes the final forging. Atri places iron into the furnace. This is the work that will create Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. The fly returns again. This time, it stings Brokkr between the eyes, on the eyelid, in a place meant to break his concentration. The blood runs. His vision blurs. In the account preserved by Snorri, this is the moment where Brokkr finally reacts. He swats at the fly to protect his eyes. And for just a moment, brief but fatal to perfection, the bellows slacken. The fire dips. When Atri pulls the final product from the forge, the hammer is still extraordinary. It is still a weapon no giant can comfortably face. But it has a flaw. Its handle is shorter than it should be. Even the smallest imperfection is noticed in the world of myth. The gods do not ignore detail, they interpret it. A short handle becomes part of the hammer's identity, as if fate itself insisted that Thor's greatest tool would carry a reminder of Loki's interference. Now the dwarves have produced 3 treasures, and Loki has produced his best attempt at sabotage. It is time for judgment. The gods are presented with the gifts. Gullinbursti is admired. Draupnir is prized. Mjolnir changes everything. In the prose Edda's telling, the gods judge that Thor's hammer is the greatest of all the gifts, because it will serve as their strongest defense against giants. The hammer's flaw does not diminish its significance. If anything, the fact that it remains supreme even with a defect makes it feel more inevitable. The gods declare Brokkr and Eitri the winners, and Loki, who wagered his head, loses. There is an immediate, practical problem. Brokkr comes to claim Loki's head. This is where Loki's mind turns from sabotage to legal maneuver. He argues that the wager promised his head, yes, but not his neck. It is a chillingly precise argument. In a culture that values oaths and contracts, the wording matters. Loki uses the literal terms of the wager as a shield. Brokkr cannot take Loki's head without cutting through Loki's neck, and Loki has not wagered his neck. So the dwarves choose a different punishment. They sew Loki's mouth shut. In some tellings, it is done with an awl and a thong. The image is stark. The god who causes trouble through speech is punished at the point where speech begins. The punishment is not eternal, but it is symbolic. Loki is not merely harmed, he is corrected, momentarily, in the language of consequences. And then, as so often happens with Loki, the world moves on without truly resolving the deeper issue, because the important result remains. From Loki's prank and Loki's wager, the gods gain treasures that become central to their identity. Sif receives hair that is more than hair. It is gold that lives. Odin holds Gungnir. Freyr possesses Skidbladnir. Odin possesses Draupnir. Freyr gains Gullinbursti. Thor gains Mjolnir. And Loki gains something else. He gains another reason to feel both essential and despised. Look closely at how the gods treat him here. Thor threatens to kill him, and Loki responds by fixing the harm. The gods accept Loki's solution and then benefit beyond measure. Yet the moment Loki loses his wager, they are willing to see him punished. They do not defend him as an oath brother of Odin. They do not protest the taking of his head. They simply watch as the consequences fall. This matters, because this story is not only about gifts, it is about relationships. It shows Loki's place in Asgard with uncomfortable clarity. Loki is tolerated while he is producing value. He is endangered the moment the value slips. And it also shows something about Loki's inner logic. He does not merely cause harm for the sake of harm. He tests boundaries, he provokes reactions, he turns social tension into action. His mischief creates pressure that forces the gods to acquire tools, weapons, and safeguards. In that sense, Loki functions like a spark in dry grass. He is not the forest fire, but he makes it possible. There is also a deeper pattern hidden in the forging itself. Loki's attempts to ruin the dwarves' work do not succeed. They do not stop the gifts from being made. They only mark the gifts with imperfection. A short handle. A reminder. In Norse myth, perfection is rare. Even the gods carry flaws. Even the greatest gifts come at a cost. So the origin of Thor's hammer is also the origin of an idea, that power arrives tangled with trouble. And Loki is, in many ways, the knot that never fully unties. If you look at the treasures gathered here, you can also see the shape of the future. Mjolnir will become the gods' daily defense against giants. Gungnir will remain tied to Odin's authority and war. Draupnir will later be associated with honor and loss when it is placed upon Baldr's funeral pyre, a quiet link between earlier prosperity and later grief. Skidbladnir and Gullinbursti will stand as symbols of Freyr's reach and abundance. All of these threads begin in one act of casual cruelty, Loki cutting Sif's hair. That is why this section matters. It shows Loki not as a distant cosmic villain, but as a close companion whose smallest actions have enormous ripple effects. It also shows that the gods, for all their power, are reactive. They respond to chaos rather than preventing it. And Loki, clever, restless, and never quite belonging, finds his place in that reactivity. He breaks. He fixes. He mocks. He bargains. He escapes. And every time he does, the world becomes more armed, more suspicious, and more tense. By the end of this story, Asgard is stronger. But it is also more fragile. Because the gods now possess treasures forged in a moment of conflict, created through Loki's provocation, and stained with the proof that Loki will risk everything, not for necessity, but for pride. That is not a lesson the gods will fully learn. But it is a lesson the universe remembers. There is a strange truth at the heart of Loki's time among the gods. For all his sharp tongue and shifting loyalties, his most consistent partnership is with the most straightforward of them all, Thor. If Odin is the mind of Asgard, Thor is the fist. He is the pressure the giants feel in their bones. He is thunder-given personality, loud, direct, and almost painfully honest in how he moves through the world. And Loki, by contrast, is the angle you do not see coming. When they travel together in the myths, it often feels like watching two different kinds of force try to share the same path. Thor solves problems by confronting them. Loki solves problems by bending around them, slipping through cracks, turning a locked door into a conversation or into a lie. The gods seem to understand something simple about this pairing. Thor alone is unstoppable in a straight line. But the worlds are not built in straight lines. Giants do not fight fair. They bargain, they trap, they confuse. They hide their strength behind tests and riddles. And Thor, for all his power, is sometimes the easiest god to mislead, because he expects the world to meet him openly. Loki is the one who notices when it will not. So again and again, in stories both comedic and unsettling, Thor finds himself turning to Loki first. Not because he trusts him as a friend, but because he needs him. And Loki, for his part, keeps returning to Thor, because Thor is the one boundary Loki cannot talk his way through. In Thor's presence, Loki is forced into a kind of honesty. Not moral honesty, practical honesty. A reminder that words have limits, and that sometimes a hammer decides what argument is allowed to continue. You can feel this dynamic in one of the most well-known myths in the Norse tradition, the recovery of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. It begins in a way that feels almost intimate. Thor wakes and reaches for what is always there, but his hand closes on nothing. The hammer is gone. In many heroic traditions, this would be the moment where the hero storms out alone, breaking doors, demanding answers, burning the world until his weapon returns. Thor does not do that. Instead, he turns to Loki. That detail matters. Thor understands that strength cannot find what has been hidden carefully. He understands, perhaps begrudgingly, that this is a problem for a different kind of mind. And Loki understands the urgency immediately, because the hammer is not just Thor's tool. It is the god's shield. Without Mjolnir, Asgard is exposed. The giants do not need a complicated plan when the hammer is missing. They only need time. So Thor and Loki go to Freya. This, too, is revealing. Freya is not merely a goddess of love in later popular retellings. In the Norse sources, she is deeply connected to wealth, power, and magic. She is a figure the gods respect, and sometimes fear. Thor asks to borrow her feather cloak, the bird-skin garment that grants flight. Freya agrees, and Loki puts it on. In the stories, Loki moves into the sky as if it is his natural element. He becomes a creature of speed and distance, crossing boundaries that would take others days. He flies to Jotunheimer, and there he finds the answer. The hammer has been stolen by the giant Thrymr, who hides it deep beneath the earth and demands an impossible price for its return, Freya as his bride. It is an audacious demand. The giants have always desired access to Asgard's power, but marriage is not merely romance and myth. Marriage is alliance, a binding of worlds, a shift in cosmic balance. If Thrymr could claim Freya, He would gain prestige, leverage, and a kind of symbolic victory over the gods. Loki returns to Asgard with the news, and the gods react the way they often do when faced with a problem that cannot be punched. They panic. They call a council. They look for a solution that does not exist. Thor's first instinct is to treat the demand as an insult worth destroying, but the hammer is still missing, and without it he is forced into restraint. Freya's response is explosive. In the poetic tradition, her anger shakes the halls of Asgard, and her famous necklace is said to break apart under the force of it. She refuses, and now the gods are stuck. This is where the story becomes both hilarious and sharp-edged, because the solution that appears is not a battle plan. It is a disguise. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, proposes it. Thor must dress as the bride. Thor hates the idea, not because he fears clothing, but because he fears ridicule. He knows how the gods speak. He knows how stories spread. In a culture built on honor, being laughed at is not harmless. But Loki pushes him. Loki argues that there is no other way. And in this moment, Loki is not the chaotic instigator. He is the strategist. He is the one who sees that honor is a smaller price than defeat. The gods dress Thor as Freyja. They place bridal linen on the god of thunder. They cover his face with a veil. They decorate him with the symbols that giants would expect. And Loki goes with him, dressed as a bridesmaid or handmaiden, the companion who will speak when Thor cannot. That is the key. Thor can endure the humiliation, but he cannot safely explain himself. Loki becomes his voice. Together, they travel to the giant's hall. The wedding feast begins. And immediately, Thor threatens to ruin the plan simply by being Thor. He eats like a force of nature. He consumes vast amounts of food and drink, an ox, whole animals, heavy quantities of mead. Krimil's watching grows suspicious. The bride does not behave like Freya. And Loki, seated close, calmly invents a reason. He explains that the bride has not eaten for days out of excitement, out of anticipation, out of overwhelming emotion. It is absurd, and it works. In these moments, Loki's genius is not complicated magic. It is social control. He speaks in the language of expectation. He gives the giants a story that fits the moment just well enough that they accept it, because accepting it is easier than questioning it. When Thrymr leans in to kiss the bride, the veil lifts, and he sees eyes that burn with something far too sharp. Again, suspicion. Again, Loki supplies an explanation, claiming the bride has not slept for nights, again out of eagerness. At each point where the plan could collapse, Loki patches it, and Thor, under the veil, holds himself steady. There is a quiet tension in that restraint. Thor's power is not absent. It is contained, like thunder behind a closed door. Finally, the giant calls for the hammer. He wants Mjolnir brought out to sanctify the marriage, placed on the bride's lap as part of the ritual. That detail is important. The giants do not just want the gods' treasures. They want the authority that comes with them. They want to claim divine objects for their own ceremonies. The hammer is brought in, and in the story's sharp turn, Thor's patience ends. He grips the hammer, and then the hall becomes what it always becomes when Thor is allowed to be himself. Violence. The myth ends with the giants dead, Hymir and his household struck down, and Thor walking away with his hammer restored. The humor of the story is obvious. The god of thunder dressed as a bride, eating like a wild animal, barely held together by Loki's excuses. But the underlying message is colder. The gods win not because they are honorable. They win because they are adaptable. And Loki is the hinge on which that adaptability turns. He makes the ridiculous plan workable. He turns humiliation into victory. He saves Asgard not with a weapon, but with a face and a voice. This is Loki at his most useful. And this usefulness is not free. Because every time Loki saves the gods, through trickery, the gods become more dependent on trickery. Their world becomes less stable. Their enemies become more suspicious. And Loki's power grows, not in the sense of being crowned, but in the sense of being needed. Now, if the Hammer story shows Loki and Thor as partners in a con, another famous cycle shows them as partners in humiliation. The journey to Utgardr. In the Prose Edda's account, Thor travels east into the lands of giants and Loki goes with him. They are joined by Thor's human companions, Isalfi and Roskva. The details of their journey are filled with the kind of eerie quiet that fits the giant world. Forests, long nights, unfamiliar shelter. They find what appears to be an enormous hall and sleep inside. During the night, the earth shakes. It feels like an earthquake, like the land itself is moving in its sleep. Thor grips his hammer and prepares for conflict. When morning comes, they discover the hall was not a hall. It was a glove, a giant's glove. And the tremors were the giant snoring. The giant is Screamir, later tied in the narrative to Utgard the Loki, the ruler of the Outlands. The story is built like a lesson in scale. Thor, who dwarfs most beings, is made small. His strength is made comic. And Loki, who relies on wit, is not spared. In Utgard the Loki's hall, the visitors are tested. Not with fair contests, with illusions. Thor is given impossible tasks: drink from a horn, lift a cat, wrestle an old woman. He strains and fails, and each failure is meant to humiliate him. Loki is given his own trial, an eating contest. This is the kind of contest Loki might expect to win. Speed, appetite, performance, a place to show off. He devours his portion quickly, but his opponent devours more. Not just the meat. In the story's famous reveal, Loki's opponent is fire itself. Logi, consuming bones, scraps, even the trough. The meaning is clear. Loki can out-eat a man. He cannot out-eat flame. The trickster is forced to confront something that cannot be tricked. And Thor, too, is forced to confront the same truth. When Utgard the Loki finally explains the illusions, Thor learns that his failures were nearly cosmic feats. The horn was connected to the sea, and Thor lowered it. The cat was the world serpent in disguise, and Thor nearly lifted it. The old woman was old age, and no one can throw old age down. In this story, Loki and Thor do not win. They endure. They are tested, mocked, and then released. And the release feels like a warning. Even Thor's strength is not absolute. Even Loki's cleverness is not absolute. There are powers in the giant world that operate on a different scale, where gods can be made into jokes. So what does Loki contribute here, beyond losing his contest? He contributes something quieter. He is the companion who shares the humiliation. He stands beside Thor when Thor cannot dominate. He watches Thor's certainty crack, just slightly, and he learns. Because Loki is always learning. The journey to Utgardr teaches Loki that deception can be used against him as easily as he uses it against others. It teaches him that there is a kind of trickery beyond social manipulation, a trickery embedded in reality itself. And it teaches Thor that even he can be outplayed. That lesson matters later. Because as Loki's relationship with Asgard deteriorates, and as the gods grow more fearful of prophecy, the line between trickster companion and trickster enemy becomes thinner. The partnership between Loki and Thor is one of the clearest ways to see that transition happening. When Loki stands beside Thor in these stories, he is not yet the final adversary. He is the uneasy ally. He is the necessary problem solver. He is the one who makes the ridiculous plan work. But he is also the one who learns where the gods are vulnerable. He sees what embarrasses Thor. He sees what confuses Thor. He sees how quickly the gods panic when a single object goes missing. He sees how the giants' halls operate, how suspicion rises, how rituals can be turned, how illusions can unmake pride. And the more Loki sees, the more dangerous he becomes. Because information is power, and Loki is a collector of pressure points. So in these journeys, bride disguises and illusion halls, feasts and contests, the partnership between Loki and Thor is not just entertaining. It is foundational. It shows Loki at his most effective, and it shows the gods at their most dependent. Thor brings force. Loki brings flexibility. And together for a time, they keep Asgard standing. But the same skills that make Loki a valuable ally, the ability to deceive, to improvise, to exploit weakness, are the very skills that will later make him impossible to contain. For now, though, Loki walks beside Thor, not as an equal, not as a servant, but as the one companion who can talk the world into holding still long enough for thunder to strike. There is a moment in every long story where mischief hardens into consequence. For Loki, that moment arrives not through a single prank or insult, but through parenthood. Until this point, Loki's actions ripple outward into embarrassment, danger, and advantage. Gods are angered, giants are tricked, treasures are won, and order is strained but preserved. The damage is real, but it is recoverable. Problems are fixed. Balance, however uneasy, is restored. That changes when Loki's personal life collides with prophecy. Loki's most consequential relationship is not with Odin or Thor or any of the gods who sit beside him in Asgard's halls. It is with Angrboda, a giantess whose name is often translated as "she who brings grief" or "the bringer of sorrow." The myths give Angrboda little narrative space, but her importance is immense. She lives apart from Asgard, in Jotunheimr, beyond the gods' control. Her union with Loki is not described as a marriage sanctioned by the Aesir. It is private, unregulated, and therefore threatening. From this union come 3 children. Each one breaks the world in a different way. The first is Fenrir the wolf. From the beginning, Fenrir is described as growing unnaturally fast. His size increases not gradually, but alarmingly. The gods see this growth and do not treat it as a curiosity. They treat it as a warning. In Norse myth, size often correlates with threat. Giants grow large because they embody forces that exceed social limits. Fenrir's rapid growth signals that he is not merely an animal, but a manifestation of something uncontrolled. The gods decide early that Fenrir must be contained. They bring him to Asgard under the pretense of monitoring him, raising him, and perhaps civilizing him. Only one god dares to feed him, Tyr. That detail matters. Tyr is associated with law, oath-keeping, and justice. He is the god who understands obligation. His willingness to approach Fenrir suggests an early attempt at coexistence. But fear overrides patience. The gods decide to bind the wolf. They test him first with ordinary chains. Fenrir allows himself to be bound and breaks free easily. Each broken chain reinforces the gods' panic. Their solutions escalate. Eventually, they commission a binding from the dwarves, Gleipnir. Unlike previous chains, Gleipnir is thin, soft, and deceptively gentle. It is forged from impossible ingredients: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the sinews of a bear, the spittle of a bird. These are not merely poetic flourishes. They are symbols of things that do not exist or are never observed. The chain represents constraint through abstraction, not force. Fenrir is suspicious. He agrees to be bound only if one of the gods places a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. This is a test not of strength but of trust. Tyr steps forward. The gods bind Fenrir. He cannot break free. When he realizes he has been deceived, he bites down. Tyr loses his hand. This moment marks a moral fracture. The gods achieve safety through betrayal. Tyr upholds his oath, but the cost is permanent. Fenrir is bound, but his rage does not disappear. It concentrates. And Loki watches. His child has been tricked, mutilated, and imprisoned, not because of what he has done, but because of what he is expected to become. The second child is Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. He is thrown into the sea that encircles the human world. There, he grows until his body wraps around the earth itself, biting his own tail. The image is vast and unsettling, a creature whose existence defines a boundary. Jormungandr does not rage openly like Fenrir. He waits. His presence turns the ocean into a threat. Storms, tides, and disasters gain a living shape, and Thor, who will later encounter the serpent, becomes tied to him in destiny. The third child is Hel. She is described as half alive and half dead, her body divided between vitality and decay. She is sent to rule over the realm of the dead who die from sickness and old age. Unlike Fenrir and Jormungandr, Hel is not chained or cast into the sea. She is given authority, but it is authority over exile. Hel's realm is cold, quiet, and final. She becomes a gatekeeper of inevitability. The gods do not kill Loki's children. They do something colder. They assign them roles in the future they fear. This decision is driven by prophecy. The gods believe these beings are destined to bring about Ragnarök, the destruction of the gods and the world as it is known. By acting early, they hope to prevent it. But Norse myth is clear about one thing: attempts to avoid fate often accelerate it. By binding Fenrir, they ensure his hatred. By casting Jormungandr into the sea, they guarantee his growth. By placing Hel in charge of the dead, they give her leverage over the cycle of life and loss. And by doing all of this, they transform Loki's relationship to Asgard. Up to this point, Loki's grievances are social. He is mocked, threatened, used, and excluded. Now they become personal. The gods have acted against his children. They have acted preemptively, without trial, without wrongdoing, based solely on fear of what might come. This is not mischief. This is trauma. There is also another child tied to Loki's story, one that complicates easy judgment: Sleipnir. Sleipnir is Odin's 8-legged horse, the finest steed in the worlds. He is born from an earlier act of Loki's shapeshifting, when Loki transforms himself into a mare to distract a giant stallion during the building of Asgard's walls. From that encounter, Loki becomes pregnant and later gives birth to Sleipnir. The gods accept this child without punishment. Odin rides him. The contrast is sharp. One of Loki's offspring becomes Odin's prized possession. The others are bound, exiled, or feared. The difference is not morality. It is utility. Sleipnir benefits the gods. Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel threaten them. This selective acceptance teaches Loki a brutal lesson about belonging. Your worth is conditional. Your family is expendable. And your loyalty will never be returned. From this point forward, Loki's actions cannot be understood as mere chaos. They are responses to injury. He does not forget Fenrir's binding. He does not forget Tyr's lost hand. He does not forget Hel's isolation. And he does not forget that the gods chose fear over trust. This section marks the true turning point in Loki's story. The trickster becomes something heavier. Not yet an open enemy, but no longer merely an inconvenient ally. The seeds of Ragnarök are planted here, not in prophecy alone, but in the gods' decisions. And Loki, once the spark, begins to understand that he may also be the fuel. Some battles in Norse myth are fought with steel. Others are fought with reputation. And few stories reveal the fragility of divine honor more clearly than Lokasenna, Loki's flighting, the verbal duel where Loki turns a feast into an unraveling. The setting is not a battlefield, it is a hall. Aegir, a figure associated with the sea and with brewing, holds a banquet. In the poetic tradition, his hall is a place of abundance. Ale served freely, guests gathered in status and comfort. It is the kind of gathering meant to reinforce community, a place where the gods can relax into the illusion that they are stable. And Loki walks in like a crack in the wall. Lokasenna begins with blood. Loki kills one of Aegir's servants, Fimafang, whose name can be associated with skill and swift service. The reason given is thin, jealousy, irritation, offense at praise. But the act itself is loud. It violates hospitality. It disrespects the host. It forces the gods to react. They drive Loki out. And for a moment it seems like the story might end there. A disruption removed, order restored, the feast continuing. But Loki does not accept exclusion. He returns. He reminds Odin of their oath. He demands a seat. In the poem, Odin yields. Loki is allowed back into the hall. That detail lands like a stone. It shows that Loki's relationship with Odin is not mere friendship, it is leverage. Once seated, Loki asks for a drink. And then he begins. Flighting is not casual trash talk. It is a cultural practice, a formalized contest of insults and accusations. The goal is not simply to be funny. The goal is to destroy honor. In a world where reputation is survival, humiliation is a wound that can outlive any physical injury. Loki knows this. So he does not insult the gods with vague mockery. He attacks their histories. He names their secrets. He drags private shame into public air. One by one, Loki targets the gods and goddesses around him. He mocks Bragi, associated with poetry, implying weakness and cowardice. He provokes Idun. He taunts Gefjon. He confronts Odin himself, accusing him of unmanly behavior in the context of Seidr, magic associated in many sources with femininity and social taboo for men. This accusation is not random. In Norse culture, certain types of insult were considered especially dangerous because they attacked a person's social identity. Loki chooses these deliberately. Odin responds with authority, reminding Loki of favors given, of protection offered. But Loki continues. He turns to Frigg. He makes insinuations about her fidelity. He attacks Freya, accusing her of promiscuity and dishonor. He targets Njordr, mocking his history as a Vanir and implying shame in how he lived. He goes after Tyr, not merely for losing his hand to Fenrir, but for the implication that Tyr cannot uphold justice if he cannot uphold himself. And then he turns to Thor. Thor arrives late in the poem, called in as if the gods know instinctively that verbal conflict can still become physical. Thor threatens Loki with violence. Loki mocks him anyway. This is crucial. In earlier tales, Loki fears Thor's hands enough to scramble for solutions. In Lokasenna, Loki does not fear him in the same way. Or, if he does, he has decided fear is no longer sufficient to control his mouth. As Loki's accusations pile up, the hall becomes something else. Not a banquet. A mirror. Because Loki's insults land only where there is something to hit. Some accusations are likely exaggeration. Some are rooted in mythic fragments we no longer possess. Some are attacks that function more like cultural slurs than literal claims. But whether every detail is true in a modern factual sense is not the point. The point is that Loki speaks in a way that forces the gods to feel exposed, and their responses reveal their insecurity. They do not calmly refute him. They threaten. They plead. They attempt to silence. In a sense, Lokasenna is Loki turning the gods' own strategies back on them. Throughout the myths, the gods rely on negotiation, oath, insult, and deception, as much as they rely on weapons. Loki exposes that dependence. He makes it obvious that divine authority is not invulnerable. It is social. It is performative. It can be undermined by the right words in the right room. This is why Loki is so dangerous. A giant can threaten Asgard with force. Loki threatens it with embarrassment, with doubt, with the destabilizing question of whether the gods deserve their own claims to honor. Loki's Senna also reveals Loki's isolation. He is surrounded by gods, but no one truly stands with him. Even Odin's allowance feels reluctant. The gods do not laugh with Loki, they laugh at him, or they stop laughing entirely. And Loki's tone is not playful. It is cutting. It is relentless. It carries the sound of resentment that has finally found an audience. When Thor threatens him repeatedly, Loki still refuses to back down until the pressure becomes unbearable. In the poem, Loki eventually leaves, but he does not leave defeated in spirit. He leaves with a promise. He foreshadows consequences. He implies that the gods will pay for what they have done. This is not the Loki of small pranks. This is Loki as prosecutor. He stands in the hall and lists the gods' flaws as if reciting charges. Some scholars interpret Lokasenna as a kind of moral inversion. The trickster, often dismissed, becomes the one who forces the community to face what it hides. But even this reading has limits, because Loki's purpose is not reform. He does not demand the gods become better. He demands they feel what he feels, exposed, controlled, judged. He wants to take the comfort out of their hall, and he succeeds. By the end of Lokasenna, the feast is no longer a celebration. It is a fractured scene where everyone has been reminded of vulnerability. And the gods' reaction is telling. They do not attempt reconciliation. They do not ask why Loki has turned so cruel. They move toward punishment. Lokasenna, then, is not only a poem of insults. It is a hinge. It marks the point where Loki's conflict with the gods becomes openly hostile. Words become weapons. Hospitality becomes a battleground. And the gods, who once tolerated Loki as an inconvenient companion, begin to treat him as a threat that must be controlled. The tragedy is that Loki has always been this capable. He has always had this tongue. He has always seen this clearly. But until now, he used those skills to keep Asgard standing. In Lokasenna, he uses them to make Asgard feel like it is already falling. Some events in myth feel inevitable only after they happen. Beforehand, they are threaded with warning, dreams, omens, uneasy silences that suggest the world already knows what is coming, even if the gods refuse to say it aloud. Baldr's death is one of those events. Baldr is not merely another god among the Aesir. He is described as radiant, fair, beloved. Light gathers around him in the poetry. He is associated with peace, beauty, and a future that feels gentler than the violent present the gods inhabit. If the Norse cosmos contains hope, Baldr is its clearest expression. So when Baldr begins to dream of his own death, the dreams are not treated as personal anxiety. They are treated as a cosmic alarm. Dreams matter in Norse tradition. Odin sacrifices an eye for knowledge. Prophecy guides war and fate. When a god dreams repeatedly of dying, it is not dismissed. The gods gather. They seek counsel. And Frigg, Baldr's mother, acts. Frigg is associated with foresight and protection. She does not attempt to confront fate directly, but to outmaneuver it. She travels through the worlds, extracting oaths from everything that exists: stone and metal, fire and water, disease and weaponry, promising that none will harm her son. This is not sentimentality. It is strategy. By the time Frigg finishes, Baldr is, for all practical purposes, invulnerable. The gods test this. They throw weapons at Baldr, they strike him, they hurl stones and spears and blades. Nothing harms him. The tests become a game, and the game becomes a celebration. This detail is crucial. What begins as fear transforms into sport. The gods laugh as Baldr stands untouched. They turn prophecy into entertainment, and in doing so they lower their guard. Loki watches. He does not join the game. He observes it. This is not the Loki of small pranks or verbal attacks. This is Loki after Lokasena. Isolated, resentful, and fully aware that the gods will not listen to him, but will still suffer from what he notices. Loki learns that one thing has been excluded from Frigg's oath: mistletoe. In the poetic sources, Frigg explains that mistletoe seemed too young, too harmless, too insignificant to require an oath. That assumption costs everything. Loki takes the form of an old woman and approaches Frigg, drawing the information out through casual conversation. This is one of the most unsettling aspects of the story. The deception is gentle. There is no threat, no force, just familiarity. Knowledge, once given, cannot be retrieved. Loki fashions a weapon from mistletoe. The sources vary on its form: dart, spear, arrow, but the symbolism is consistent. The smallest thing becomes the deadliest. Then Loki looks for the right hand. Hother, Baldr's brother, is blind. He does not participate in the game. He stands apart, listening to the laughter of others. Loki approaches him. He speaks as a helper, not as an instigator. He offers to guide Hother's aim so that he too can take part in the game. This is the final cruelty. Hother does not know what he is holding. He does not know what he is being asked to do. He trusts the voice beside him. Loki guides his hand. The mistletoe flies, and Baldr falls. The reaction is immediate and absolute. Silence replaces laughter. Shock freezes the hall. Baldr lies dead, not wounded, not unconscious, but gone. There is no celebration. There is no confusion about what this means. The invulnerable god has been killed. The future has cracked. Grief spreads through Asgard, but grief in Norse myth is rarely passive. It demands response. Hermodr rides to hell. He travels the dangerous road to the underworld, riding Sleipnir through darkness and difficulty, seeking Baldr's return. Hell listens, and she offers a condition. If all things in the world weep for Baldr, he may return. This is not mercy. It is a test of unity. The gods send messengers across the worlds. Everything weeps: gods, humans, animals, stones, trees. Everything but one. A giantess named Juk refuses. She will not cry. She claims Baldr has done nothing for her. The sources are explicit. Auk is Loki, disguised again. Not through violence, through refusal. This second act is quieter than the first, but it seals the outcome. Baldr remains in hell. The gods now understand. This was not an accident. This was not mischief. This was murder. And the consequences are no longer abstract. Baldr's death destabilizes the cosmos. He is not merely lost. He is removed from the future. Many sources suggest that Baldr is meant to survive Ragnarök and help shape the world that follows. By killing him now, Loki disrupts even that distant hope. For the gods, this is the breaking point. They do not debate. They do not negotiate. They act. Hother is killed, in some accounts by Vali, Odin's son, born specifically to avenge Baldr. Hother's death adds another layer of tragedy, a blind god manipulated into murder, then executed for it. Loki flees. He transforms. He hides. But the gods pursue. Baldr's death redefines Loki's role in the mythic structure. Before this moment, Loki is disruptive but functional. After it, he becomes an existential threat. The gods' fear of prophecy hardens into certainty. Their patience ends. And Loki, having crossed the final line, can no longer return to Asgard as anything but an enemy. This is the point of no return. The laughter is gone. The hall is no longer safe, and the future, once bright with Baldr's presence, darkens toward Ragnarök. From here on, every action moves toward collapse. And Loki, once the spark at the edges of the gods' world, now stands at the center of its undoing. After Baldr's death, the world feels different in the myths. Not because the sky changes color or the seas rise overnight, but because the social order of the gods hardens into something more desperate. The Aesir have lived with danger for ages, giants at the borders, monsters in the distance, prophecy humming like a low note beneath everything. But Baldr's death is not a distant threat. It is proof. The gods have been breached. And the one who breached them is not a giant army, not a cosmic flood, not a storm. It is Loki. So the response is swift. No more tolerance. No more bargaining. No more pretending Loki is merely inconvenient. The myths describe Loki fleeing, and the flight itself carries the familiar signature of his life: transformation, improvisation, and a relentless instinct for survival. In the prose Edda, Loki hides in the wilderness, in a place of waterfalls and cold stone, where water breaks into white noise and the land is difficult to approach. He builds a house with multiple doors, an architecture of paranoia, designed so that no matter which direction danger arrives, escape remains possible. This is Loki as the hunted. The trickster who once walked freely in Asgard's halls now lives like a creature cornered. And still, he keeps working. He invents. He crafts. The sources tell of Loki making a net, an object that will become ironically important because it is the very tool the gods will later use to catch him. There is something grimly poetic in that detail. Loki creates a method of capture, and then he becomes the one captured. When the gods come for him, Loki senses them. He sees the smoke of their approach or hears their movement across the land. The myths differ on small texture, but the central image holds. Loki reacts instantly. He transforms. He becomes a salmon. The salmon is not a random choice. In the Norse world, salmon are fast, slippery, difficult to hold. They move with sudden force against currents, disappearing in flashing arcs. It is a shape built for escape. Loki leaps into the river. The gods pursue. And now the irony tightens. The gods use a net, modeled on the one Loki invented. They drag it through the water, trying to catch the thing that cannot be caught. In the prose Edda, Loki almost succeeds. He leaps over the net with a powerful jump. But Thor is there. Thor reaches. He grabs Loki mid-leap. And in the grip of Thor's hand, Loki's transformation fails to save him. This moment is often given a physical explanation. Thor's grasp on the salmon is said to explain why salmon are narrow near the tail, as if the god's fingers forever marked the species. But the symbolic explanation is clearer. Loki can slip past most things. He cannot slip past Thor. Once Loki is captured, the myths pivot into punishment. The gods are not interested in negotiation. They have lost Baldr. They have watched the underworld refuse to release him. They have watched Loki's hand in both acts, the killing and the refusal to mourn. So they decide to end Loki's threat permanently. But again, Norse myth is rarely simple. The punishment they choose is not execution. It is containment. And the way they contain Loki is among the harshest images in the entire tradition. First, the gods turn to Loki's family. This is where the punishment becomes especially brutal, because it does not fall only on Loki. In the prose Edda, Loki has a wife, Sigyn, whose name is associated with victory and loyalty. The myths do not give her long speeches or dramatic roles, but her presence is one of the most haunting in the entire cycle. Loki and Sigyn have sons, Narfi and Vali. In some accounts, the names and details shift, but the narrative is consistent in its cruelty. The gods seize Loki's children, and they transform one son into a wolf. That wolf tears the other son apart, Then the gods take the entrails of the killed son and use them as bonds. They bind Loki with the guts of his own child. This is not merely punishment. It is psychological destruction. It is the gods turning Loki's legacy into a chain. It is also a grotesque mirror of what Loki has done to the gods, turning family into weapon, turning intimacy into harm. But the gods are not finished. They take Loki to a cavern beneath the earth. They fasten him to stones, often described as 3 stones, so that he lies restrained, unable to move, unable to turn away. And then Skadi appears. Skadi is associated with winter, mountains, and a hard kind of justice. In the myths, she has her own grievances against the gods. She is not gentle. Skadi places a serpent above Loki. The serpent's venom drips, drop after drop. It is slow. It is deliberate. It is designed not to kill quickly, but to hurt endlessly. This is where Sigyn becomes essential. Sigyn stays beside Loki. She holds a bowl over him to catch the venom. While the bowl is full, Loki is spared. But bowls must be emptied. When Sigyn leaves to pour out the venom, even for a moment, the drops fall. They strike Loki, and Loki writhes. The myths explain earthquakes as Loki's pain, his convulsions shaking the earth. Whether one takes that literally or symbolically, the image is clear. Loki's suffering is not contained. It radiates outward. This punishment accomplishes what the gods want in the short term. Loki is immobilized. But it also guarantees what the gods fear. Because punishment like this does not erase hatred. It concentrates it. It turns resentment into something pure and stable. And it ensures that when Loki finally breaks free, if he breaks free, he will not return to Asgard as a complicated ally. He will return as a force. Sigyn's role here is often described as loyal, even loving, but it is also tragic in a quieter way. She becomes a figure of endurance, holding suffering at bay with her own hands, her own patience, her own repeated task. In the story, she is the one who prevents Loki's pain from becoming constant. But she cannot prevent it forever. And she cannot change the logic of the gods. The Aesir do not ask what they have become by doing this. They do not question whether binding Loki in such a manner is justice or vengeance. They simply do it. And in doing so, they lock themselves into the next stage of the myth. Because Ragnarök is not only a prophecy about monsters and flame. It is also a prophecy about relationships breaking. Baldr's death broke trust. Loki's punishment breaks any remaining possibility of reconciliation. From this point forward, Loki is no longer part of Asgard's social world at all. He is beneath it, under stone, under venom, under the steady, quiet hands of Sigyn. And the world above continues, trying to pretend that a chain can hold the future. But the myths never let us forget. Something bound is still present. Something punished is still alive. And the longer Loki lies under the earth, the more certain it becomes that when he rises, he will rise with the weight of everything that happened in the dark. Not as a prankster, not as a guest, but as the consequence the gods built with their own hands. In Norse myth, the end of the world is not a surprise. It is announced. It is forecast. It is woven into the logic of the cosmos so thoroughly that even the gods, with all their power, behave as if they are moving down a corridor whose walls are narrowing. Ragnarök is that corridor. And Loki, bound beneath the earth with venom above his face, becomes one of its central hinges. The long wait before Ragnarök is not calm. It is tension disguised as routine. The sources describe a world that continues. Seasons turn, halls fill, feasts happen, weapons are carried. Yet behind it all, the idea of collapse grows heavier. Signs appear. Not as a single trumpet blast, but as a slow unraveling. The moral fabric thins. Brother turns against brother. Oaths weaken. Trust becomes scarce. In the poetic Edda's vision, the world becomes colder in spirit before it becomes colder in temperature. Then comes the great winter, Fimbulvetri. 3 winters in a row with no summer between. Snow drives sideways. Wind bites through wood. Food becomes scarce. People fight harder for less. This is not merely weather. It is the world losing balance. At the edges of the cosmos, the chains begin to fail. Fenrir breaks free. That detail is vital. The wolf that the gods bound in fear is no longer merely a threat in prophecy. He is moving. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, stirs in the sea. When he moves, the oceans respond. Waves rise, shores shudder. The old boundary becomes an active force, and Hell's domain becomes restless. The dead are no longer silent in the way the living prefer. Then, in the chaos of these movements, Loki is released. The sources do not always linger on the mechanics of how. The emphasis is not on the physical method, but on the inevitability. The bound cannot remain bound forever. The venom, the stones, the entrails, the waiting. All of it becomes a pressure that cannot be held. Loki rises. And the Loki who rises is not the Loki who once traded jokes with gods. He is not the Loki who solved problems. He is not even the Loki who stood in Aegir's hall and insulted everyone in reach. He is the Loki shaped by years beneath the earth, by pain, by humiliation, by the memory of Baldr's death, by the memory of his children's fates, and by the knowledge that the gods tried to freeze the future in place with violence. Now he becomes what they feared. Loki does not return to Asgard to bargain. He returns to lead. In the poems, Loki becomes the helmsman of Naglfar, a ship made from the nails of the dead. The image is deliberately unsettling. The dead themselves, in small pieces, have been accumulating into a vessel. Neglect, uncut nails, unprepared corpses, contributes to the ship's completion. Even in daily human life, Ragnarök is being built. When the time comes, the seas break their order. Naglfar sails. It carries forces aligned against the gods. At the same time, Surtur advances from the realm of fire, leading flames that will later consume the world. The sky is disturbed. The sun is swallowed. The moon disappears. Stars lose their place. A sense of orientation, of knowing where you are in the universe, falls apart. Heimdall blows the horn, Jallarhorn, calling the gods to meet the end they have anticipated. Asgard prepares. And this is where Loki's role becomes sharply defined. In Ragnarök, Loki is not simply one enemy among many. He is the one enemy who knows the gods personally. Giants know Asgard as an opponent. Loki knows it as a former home. He knows the tone of their voices. He knows which insults land. He knows how they react under pressure. He knows where their confidence is real and where it is performative. This intimacy turns him into a uniquely dangerous adversary. The battlefield is vast. The gods meet their enemies. Odin confronts Fenrir. The wolf swallows Odin. This is not merely death. It is the destruction of the god most associated with planning and knowledge. The one who sought to outthink fate is consumed by it. Thor confronts Jormungandr. He strikes the serpent, and the serpent falls. But Thor is poisoned by the serpent's venom. He takes a few steps, often described as 9, and dies. Tyr confronts Garmin, the hound associated with Hel's realm. They kill each other. Freyr confronts Surtur. Freyr lacks his sword. given away earlier in myth, and he dies beneath fire. And then there is Loki. Loki meets Heimdall. In many ways, Heimdall is Loki's opposite. Heimdall is a guardian, a watcher, a figure of vigilance. He is associated with boundaries, the bridge Bifrost, the edge between worlds, the ability to hear and see far beyond ordinary range. If Loki is the god of slipping past boundaries, Heimdall is the god of holding them. Their confrontation feels like a final argument between two principles: deception versus vigilance, disruption versus containment. The sources state it simply: they kill each other. No elaborate dialogue. No negotiation. Just mutual destruction. It is a clean ending for a relationship that has been building in tension for a long time. Because the gods could bind Loki, but they could not change what Loki represented. And Heimdall, for all his watchfulness, cannot watch his way out of destiny. After the battles, the world burns. Surtur's flames consume the land. The sea rises and washes over everything. The old world dies. But Norse myth does not end in permanent void. After Ragnarök, a new world emerges. Some gods survive. Some return. Baldr is said to come back from hell, stepping into the new world as a symbol that the future was not fully destroyed, only delayed. This detail is important because it shows that Loki's greatest act, Baldr's death, does not annihilate hope forever. It postpones. It wounds. It forces the world through fire. But it does not erase renewal. So what does Loki become in this frame? Not simply an agent of evil. Not simply a villain who wins or loses. Loki becomes an instrument of breakdown. A force that brings to completion what has been building all along. The gods, the giants, the monsters, the prophecies, these are not separate threads. They are one system. And Loki is the point where the system breaks visibly. In Ragnarök, Loki's leadership is not portrayed as triumphant. It is portrayed as necessary. It is portrayed as the consequence of everything that came before. The gods' fear, their punishments, their reliance on deception, their inability to accept instability. Loki, unbound, does what Loki has always done. He accelerates. He exposes. He forces the world to confront what it tried to ignore. And then he dies, locked in mutual destruction with the god who guarded the bridge. The trickster does not survive to rule the new world. He is not crowned. He is not redeemed. He is the storm that passes through, leaving behind ash, and, eventually, a cleared horizon. When the flames of Ragnarök recede, Norse myth does something unexpected. It does not linger on judgment. There is no cosmic courtroom. No final verdict spoken over the bodies of gods and giants alike. Instead, there is silence. And then renewal. This is where Loki's legacy becomes most difficult to reduce to simple labels. Because in the world that emerges after Ragnarök, Loki is gone. He does not return to shape the new age. He does not rule, advise, or repent. He is absent. And that absence matters. The surviving gods rebuild without him. Baldr returns from hell, carrying with him a future that feels calmer, less volatile. The new world is described as fertile, quieter, more ordered. Fields grow without sowing. Conflict no longer defines every interaction. In this future, Loki's energy is no longer present. That does not mean he was unnecessary. It means his function is complete. Throughout the myths, Loki is never positioned as a ruler or a moral guide. He is positioned as a catalyst. He speeds things up. He reveals fault lines. He forces outcomes that might otherwise take generations. This is why attempts to read Loki as purely evil flatten the story. If Loki were simply malicious, the gods' response would be straightforward. He would be destroyed early. The myths would end with containment. Instead, the gods rely on him. They benefit from him. They imitate him. And when they punish him, they do so with methods that mirror his own cruelty. Loki's legacy, then, is not chaos alone. It is exposure. He exposes the gods' dependence on deception. He exposes their fear of prophecy. He exposes how quickly they abandon trust when faced with uncertainty. He exposes the fragility of honor when it is built on image rather than action. In this sense, Loki functions as a stress test. He does not create the weaknesses of the gods. He reveals them. The giants have always threatened Asgard. Fate has always pointed toward Ragnarök. Monsters have always waited at the edges. Loki simply connects these forces, accelerating what is already in motion. This is why Loki survives in memory more vividly than many gods who outlive him in the story. Thor is strength. Odin is knowledge. But Loki is tension. And tension is what stories remember. Across cultures, trickster figures play similar roles. They cross boundaries. They break rules that others treat as sacred. They mock authority, not to replace it, but to show its limits. Loki's version of this role is darker because of proximity. He is not a trickster outside the system. He is a trickster inside it. He knows the gods personally. He shares meals with them. He watches their rituals, their celebrations, their fear. When he turns against them, it feels like betrayal because it is. But betrayal in Norse myth is rarely one-sided. Loki is betrayed as well. His children are punished for prophecy, not action. His loyalty is treated as conditional. His usefulness becomes a leash. And when he finally crosses the line, the gods respond not with restraint, but with a punishment designed to erase him socially and psychologically. That punishment does not prevent Ragnarök. It ensures it. So what does Loki mean in the end? He means that order maintained through fear is temporary. He means that prophecy avoided through violence still arrives. He means that systems that rely on a single stabilizing force, whether strength, knowledge, or trickery, will eventually collapse under their own rigidity. Loki's story also resists moral comfort. There is no lesson that says be like Loki or do not be like Loki. There is only complexity. He is clever, and that cleverness saves lives. He is cruel, and that cruelty destroys futures. He is loyal until loyalty is no longer returned. He is destructive, but not meaningless. In modern retellings, Loki often becomes a symbol of rebellion, queerness, outsider identity, or anti-authoritarian resistance. Those interpretations speak to why Loki continues to resonate, but they are reflections, not replacements, of the original mythic function. In the Norse sources, Loki is not fighting for freedom or justice. He is responding to pressure. He is reacting to exclusion. He is doing what happens when a system depends on a destabilizer and then tries to erase him. The new world after Ragnarök does not include Loki because it no longer needs him. That may be the most unsettling part of his story. Loki is not redeemed. He is not condemned. He is outgrown. And that suggests something profound about the Norse worldview. Even the most disruptive force has a place. Even chaos has a role. But nothing is meant to last forever. As the myths close, the listener is left not with comfort, but with perspective. The gods fall. The world burns. And something quieter emerges. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, take a moment before moving on. These myths were not told to reassure. They were told to prepare, to remind listeners that instability is part of existence, and that understanding it matters more than denying it. If you enjoyed this slow, immersive journey through history and mythology, you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. New stories are always on the way, and you're always welcome back. For now, rest easy.